William Blake was born in London, England, on November 28, 1757. He was born on 28 Broad Street, Golden Square, in the Soho district of the city of Westminster, where today there is a plaque that identifies the site. He married Catherine Blake nee Boucher at the age of 24. She is accredited with helping Blake paint and print some of his works. Their marriage was childless. She died in 1831, a few years after Blake's death. Blake himself died on August 12, 1827, in London due to liver failure.
So according to G.E. Bentley's Stranger from Paradise, which is a biography of William Blake, in his analysis of his art, he referred to it as otherworldly and fundamentally spiritual, with a lot of Christian references. Now, Blake's understanding of art started at a very young age, so much so that his family quickly picked up on it, and his mother especially encouraged him to make drawings from the privacy of his room, where she would hang those drawings, which usually came with illustrated verses, in her chamber. So there were a lot of things that were influential in Blake's art, but the most influential of them would be the neighborhood that he lived in. So the neighborhood that he lived in was called Golden Square, and Golden Square had a bunch of remarkable artists like Jean-Étienne Lyotard, the great anatomist John Hunter, the fashionable Angelica Kauffman, and David Hartley, whose father's work Blake later illustrated. So, because Blake has always been interested in art, even when he was working with his father in his very business, he drew designs on the back of all his shop bills, neglected the figures of arithmetic, and make sketches on the counter. So his dad, being the supportive dad he is, and seeing this, he enrolled him in the drawing school of Henry Pars. So in Henry Pars, boys were trained, because only boys could go to the school, but boys were trained to copy prints of famous paintings and classical statues. So they learned how to draw the way that the Greeks and the neoclassicists were thought, with the fundamentals being on human figures. So usually they would do this by just copying the figures. They would trace it, or they would try and sketch it according to how it was exactly. And it was believed that copying correctly is the only school to the language of art. So these focus on figures and statues were very influential in Blake's later works. So during those years that he was in Henry Pars, Blake bought casts from sculptors he admired and prints he admired. So he bought casts of the Dying Gladiator, the Hercules Farnese, and the Venus de Medici, the Apollo Belvedere, and the Dancing Faun. He also bought prints of Raphael, Michelangelo, Martin Hirschsprung, Albert Dürer, Giulio Romano, and the rest of the historic class, and then he didn't buy anything else because he didn't like them. He was very specific about what he liked. So those prints really occupied a large part of this small family house. His house was small, but he got all those prints I mentioned, so his house was very crammed. So in the descriptive catalog, published in 1809, he wrote, and he, that means Blake, "The eye that can prefer the coloring of the Titans and Rubens to that of Michelangelo and Raphael ought to be modest and doubt its own powers." He loved Michelangelo's dedication to his craft as well as his genius. His enthusiasm for Michelangelo was so great that he was often referred to as Michelangelo Blake. Blake's 4 years at Pars Drawing School from the years 10 to 14 established his interest in the human art form of resemblance of Roman art. And after that, he worked with James Bashier in his apprenticeship years after his years in Henry Pars Drawing School. And he worked as an engraver for 7 years, where they met in Stationers' Hall close to St. Paul's Cathedral. So Blake was really into old-fashioned line engraving, and that's the same skill that Bashier was also into. And remember, Bashier, that was his apprentice. He was also into Gothicness, and he liked going into Gothic churches and just drawing the Westminster Abbey and the little decorations that were all over the churches. During his time there, he published the first work that he had. He published the History of England, which was just a small book of engravings. So after his apprenticeship, he applied in 1797 to be a student of the Royal Academy in Somerset House in the Strand, and where he got accepted. So during this time, many advisors, especially a man named Reynolds, tried to convince him to pursue something more sustainable in his art, something less Roman and Gothic and more refined and new. But he felt really strongly about this because Gothic and Roman has been kind of his interest for a very long time and has been the thing he's been working on. So that's what he really did. His first submission, The Death of Earl Goodwin, was a very good hit within the school, and it was an exploration of the heavenly with the mortal. Right now, it's the time you've all been waiting for. It's The Chimney Sweeper, from The Songs of Innocence by William Blake. When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, 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 weep. So your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep. There's little Tom Dacre, who cried when his head that curled like a lamb's back was shaved. So I said, hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair. And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom was a-sleeping, he had such a sight, that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. And by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing they run, and wash in a river and shine in the sun. Then naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise upon clouds and sport in the wind. And the angel told Tom, if he'd been a good boy, he'd have God for his father and never want joy. And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark, and got with our bags and our brushes to work. Though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm. So if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. So first up we have the painting of Innocence, and the painting is covered with children playing in kind of like a green landscape, with their faces being unidentifiable. They look like little stick figures. This landscape is the one that was present in the dream, the one of a pastoral setting, and the one where they could all play and they were happy. And this is the way that the children are able to escape from their current realities and how they're still locked in that innocence. So first, let's talk about the form of the poem. So the poem is divided into 6 different stanzas, and they have 4 lines. And this is a commonality in Blake's poem. It's very simple, and especially in the innocence portion of this poem, it mirrors the simplicity of childhood. So again, this poem is divided into 6 stanzas with 4 distinct sections. We have the section where we are introduced to the chimney sweep. We have the section where Tom Dacre arrives to the chimney sweep. We have the 3rd to the 5th stanza, which is the section where they're in the dream, and then the last stanza, where the boys go back into their working day-to-day life. So the poem, form-wise, is very anapestic. Anapestic means it's unstressed, unstressed, stressed, and it also has iambic meters. That means it's unstressed and then stressed. And so these 2 forms of meters together combine a very lyrical, song-like quality that almost feels like a nursery rhyme. And so, like, an example of this would be in line 9. And so he was quiet and that very night. So you see that very anapestic kind of beat. And in fact, in line 14, there's a complete anapestic tetrameter without iambic meters, and that is in line 14, and it says, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. And so in the dream state, that also mirrors how Tom Dacre felt in this dream, the liberation of suffering, and how the power of imagination can be able to reframe experiences. So the chimney sweeper also has a rhyme scheme of AABB, which helps with the easy flow of the poem. Throughout the poem, the rhyme scheme seems to indicate a sense of duality, although it's not always. So we can see in lines 7 and 8, there's a contrast between the words bear and hair. In lines 9 and 10, there's the contrast with the word night and sight. And then also, sadly, there's a contrast with the word boy and joy towards the end of the poem. The very last couplet with the words warm and harm is very sinister because, again, it shows that duality, and it shows that there's something wrong with the ending, that not all is resolved. Also, let us also talk about the speaker of the poem. The speaker of the poem is a young chimney sweep who was sold as a child before he even learned how to speak properly. We get 2 perspectives of this. We get chimney sweep, and we also get Tom Dacre. It's also important that we talk about setting as well. The poem is set in London during the late Industrial Revolution, which is everything the Romantics were kind of against: the whole industriality, the whole over-reliance on science and disregard for nature. And this poem is also set in past tense, and it's almost a prophetic declaration of the fate of the children almost. It's like there's nothing you can do to change that which happened. The most striking difference is the pastoral ways that London is portrayed in the dream, rather than the realistic industrial wasteland that London actually is. And again, this perpetuates the romantic myth of nature that writers were very concerned about during the Romantic period. There is one very interesting symbol in this poem as well. It's the symbol of Tom Dockery's hair. His hair is a symbol of youthful innocence. As he joins this chimney sweep, his hair is shaved off, thus he loses his innocence. And it's made clear to how his hair is compared to a lamb's back. This theme also suggests a loss of individuality for the children, now that Tom Dockery has to surrender to conform to the rest of the chimney boys. The act of shaving one's hair, although I think this might be a bit far-fetched, is the allusion to the biblical story of Samson, who loses his strength as his hair is cut off. So there are a bunch of poetic devices that are used in this poem, but I want to bring highlights to three ones. I want to bring highlights to the device of assonance, the device of sibilance, and the device of epizeuxis. So, assonance. And there's a lot of assonance throughout the whole poem, but the main one I'll explain for you guys is line 4. So it states in line 4, "So your chimneys I sweep, and in suit I sleep." So if you notice, there's a rhyme of sweep and sleep. And if you've also realized, there's also a line that says weep. So they have those same double E words in the middle. And this indicates that the children are kind of in this repetitive zone of sweeping, sleeping, and weeping. So throughout their entire lived realities, this is how their lives are. It's sad, and it's a combination of sweeping, sleeping, and weeping. Consonance is also used in this poem. For example, it's used in line 6 with the repetition of the soft L sounds, which mirrors the innocence of Tom Dockery. This is opposed to the harsh K sounds in lines 11 and 12. That gives this poem a sort of ominousness that's very grounded in harsh realities. So again, we have those soft L sounds that indicate innocence and the harsh K sounds that indicates ominousness. Lastly, we have epizeuxis, which is a figure of speech that is repeated in immediate succession with no intervening words. And this word, it's the word weep that's being repeated over and over again. Repetition is very important because this means it's something that we have to focus on. And with the word weep, the fact that it was repeated 4 times with nothing in between shows that this is very important. And this mirrors the feeling that the children were in this chimney sweep. The main theme of the poem is the corruption of religion as a propagation of the dangerous status quo. And it's the biggest theme that religious exploitation plays on children and the freedom that they have. The actions that the adult takes upon the children can affect them societally, and due to this, the children have little agency to determine how to change the world according to their own interests. They're also believed into buying the status quo of that society and believing that they have no alternatives except for what is happening in the hereafter, reflecting the ills that are present in adult society during this time as well.
Chimney Sweeper, from the Songs of Experience by William Blake. A little black thing among the snow, crying, weep, weep, in notes of woe. Why are thy father and mother? Say. They are both gone up to the church to pray. Because I was happy upon the heath, and smiled among the winter snow. They clothed me in the clothes of death, and taught me to sing the notes of woe. And because I am happy, and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury, and are gone to praise God and his priest and king, who make up a heaven of our misery. This image shows the child fully aware of the reality that they live in as a chimney sweep. This child is living in a setting completely covered in black, and with the background engulfed in darkness, as opposed to the light covered in the first picture. The chimney sweeper contains 3 quatrains, arranged in the simple form that is a trademark of Blake. This poem is not as long as the Innocence poem. The poem is iambic tetrameter, retaining the sing-song quality that Innocence had. The simplicity of the poem, as well as the meter, establishes that the speaker is a child. However, the use of the meter is also interesting because it expresses deep, negative ideas in the form of simplicity, increasing the emotional core of the poem. Whenever the meter reflects the sweep's reality, it is usually done in iambic meter to establish a serious and structured tone, like in line 7. It is also predictable, which gives an edge of seriousness and structure. They clothed me in the clothes of death. However, when the sweep is putting up an image that is false, the one that is most identifiable with childhood, it is anapestic and light, like in line 9. And because I'm happy and dance and sing, the rhyme scheme is AABB, CA, EF, EF. The change in rhyme scheme from stanzas 1 to stanza 2 reflects a change in the speaker. Once the sweep enters in line 4, the rhyme scheme changes. As established by Innocence, partial rhymes usually suggest something is going wrong, and that can be seen in lines 5 and 7 with the words heath and death. The heath, an open field of nature, is expressed as some kind of death. The romantic myth of nature has been destroyed for the child and is now compared to a chamber of death than the ideal pastoral. Like Innocence, there are two speakers in the poem. There is the outside speaker who is present in the first 3 lines talking to the chimney sweep. The speaker seems to be an adult, but it is not specified. The chimney sweep is an interesting speaker because he is expressing ideas that are wise for his age. He also has an ironic tone that shapes the poem, which contradicts the simple, straightforward tone that is in Innocence. The chimney sweep is also aware of the theme of organized religion playing a part in his suffering. The poem appears to be set on a winter's day, and there is a cinematic opening, which deviates from the boy covered in soot despite the white snow around him. The chimney sweep has been stained by the adults around him, and his innocence is surrounded by cold. The biggest theme of the poem is the negative role that religious exploitation plays on childhood and the freedom of children. This theme builds on the original theme in Innocence about propagating the status quo, and it accurately depicts the negative influence that this can play on the livelihoods of actual children. It also destroys the sweep's view of religion as a means of oppression rather than salvation, as expressed by the last line of the poem. Experience also fully develops the idea that organized religion can help people let go of the guilt that they should feel for their actions. They believe as long as they go to praise God and his priest and king, they should be absolved from all responsibility. A few poetic devices were used throughout the poem to explore the theme of neglect's effect on childhood. Alliteration is used in the first 2 lines with the words weep, woe, and where in the first stanza. This establishes the air of tragedy and emotional desolation that the chimney sweep experiences. This contradicts the H sounds used in line 5, which suggest happiness and childlike carefreeness. The strongest use of alliteration happens in line 11 with the words God and gone. This suggests that the child and Blake himself believe that society has lost its God. There is also the use of paradox in the last line. In the last line, there is one main paradox that occurs. Paradoxes are common in these poems, as the term experience and innocence is usually a paradox in themselves. This is with heaven being seen as a heavenly home, being associated with misery. This is seen as the heaven is being worshipped as well as the God and his priest and king, as the kids are suffering. They are literally praising God through the suffering of the children. This poem also plays with the idea of repetition. Of course, this is seen with the repetition of the word weep in line 2. This is an interesting contrast from the first poem, which repeats this term 4 times. This might suggest that the speaker is getting weaker as they are working in the sweeps for longer. Overall, this poem is still important today because child exploitation is still going on, and it is sometimes upheld by adult society, whether it be child rapes within the Catholic Church or female mutilation in parts of the world as an extension of culture. Overall, children are usually told that it is done for the best, and their happiness is only guaranteed once they go through all these ills.